How many of you would love to have the energy, the excitement, the enthusiasm, the joy that a 5-year-old has? A couple weeks ago, I had the pleasure of hearing a little knock on my front door. And when I opened it, I looked down, and there was Zoe, Reverend Joanne's granddaughter, and her husband, Gary. And she looked me right in the eye, and she said, "Hi, I'm Zoe, and I'm 3 years old." And then I saw her looking beyond me, taking in everything that was in the house, looking through the house at the woods behind. She was totally connected to her experience. She was curious about what she was seeing. We walked into the kitchen and she saw the juicer. I said, "Come on over." So I took her over there and I picked her up and said, "Well, this is where you put the carrots and the celery, and then you put your glass under here and juice comes out." She looks out the window and she sees a tub in the backyard on our deck, and it's filled with herbs. It was a wedding present that we were given. She was very curious about that, so we went out and I said, "Here's the chives," and we put a lot of chives and basil. And smell the basil. The basil is really powerful smell. And we put these in our salad. She was totally engaged. She was there in the moment, not thinking about why they had come in the first place. I mean, they came to pick up a tree trimmer. Not thinking about where they were going to go afterwards. There was no time for her. The only time for her was now. She wasn't thinking about the experience. She was living the experience. A couple weeks ago, I was sitting in Great Northern Mall waiting for my wife Jerry to have her haircut finished up. And I saw a young mother with her daughter, and the daughter was maybe 4 or 5 years old. And they were walking along, and as they got next to me, I noticed that the little girl's shoe was untied. And I said, "Your shoe is untied." The mom heard it. They stopped. She tied her shoe. And then they began to walk away. And as she was walking away, and then she turned. And she looked me directly in the eye. And she did this. It's connected through the heart. She's living the joy of her life through her heart. And this is a story about how we come from living the heart, through the heart, feeling that joy, how we move into the head and find ourselves separated. And what can we do to bring ourselves back into that heart space, that energy, that divine connection? So what is this place that these children were in? Well, Mary O'Malley calls it the meadow in her book, What's in the Way is the Way. Eckhart Tolle in The Power of Now and the New Earth calls it the now. Jesus Christ called it the kingdom of heaven. And he said, lest you bring yourself and change yourself to be like the children, you will never enter it. They're all talking about the same thing. They're all talking about coming directly into life and experiencing it. There's no time. You're not worried about what's coming down the road or thinking about anticipating. You're not thinking what has gone before. Regrets or sorrows or positive experiences that you're remembering. So, do we as adults experience that? I would say, yeah, we get glimpses. A few months ago, I was at a men's group here at Unity, and I was talking to Ed Asner. And he told me this incredible story about a hummingbird. He said he was sitting in his backyard, just really feeling the quiet of the whole situation. And he saw a hummingbird. And he looked at it and became curious. All his attention going out under the hummingbird. And then he held out his hand with a finger. And the hummingbird came over and sat on his finger. So I asked him, Ed, what were you thinking? Nothing. Was there any time? No. Were you thinking about where you were going to go or just the hummingbird? No. There was no thought. I was just experiencing the hummingbird. Over the last several weeks, I've been in a book study on Mary O'Malley's book, What's in the Way is the Way. And at one point, Reverend Dana, who was leading the book study, asked, who has experiences of the meadow? And I wasn't surprised to hear 3 different people talk about coming into an experience with their young children or grandchildren where there was no expectation of what was going to happen. They didn't know what the child was going to want to do. They weren't thinking about anything else that had happened, but the child was in the moment and took them with her or him. Sometimes we may experience this coming into the moment with art, great art or symphony, where the experience is one of just not thinking, feeling the stillness, the quiet, and being there in that symphony, being there looking at that piece of art. So what happens? How do we go from experiencing life through the heart, feeling that enthusiasm, that connection, that in the moment, that lack of time, into a place where we're constantly thinking? We have this voice in the head that is narrating everything that we're doing. It's telling us what we're experiencing. It's kind of interceding between us and the experience. Well, part of it starts with language, because if you think about language, as children are young, they begin to learn what words mean. And those words are made up of 5 vowel sounds and 21 consonants, which are nothing more than pushing air. And they attempt to capture the essence of the object that they label. But think about it for a moment. If I tell you what an orange tastes like, if I tell you it's sweet and juicy and it explodes in your mouth when you bite on it, you won't have that experience. But if I give you the piece of orange and you put it in your mouth and you bite down, immediately you understand what an orange is. A Zen master once said, you can say the word water over and over and over again and you'll never be wet. These children are wet. Our goal is to become wet. Along with language is the development of the self-image, that lens through which we perceive the world. And as we're growing, we've got a collection of different experiences, thoughts, feelings, beliefs, emotions that are bombarding us. And it's like a big jigsaw puzzle. We're putting together all of this and creating an image of ourselves. Sometimes there's positive input, sometimes the input isn't so positive. Sometimes the stories are created by ourselves. Sometimes the stories are created by someone else. And we tacitly agree to believe those. Don Miguel Ruiz tells a story of a young mother and her daughter. The daughter just loved to sing and dance. One day the mom had really had a bad day at work. Everything was going wrong. She had a headache when she came home. She just wanted peace and quiet. And her daughter was dancing around the house, singing at the top of her lungs. And finally, the mother lost her patience and said, "Can you just shut up? Your singing is ugly." Automatically, there was an impression that young girl adopted, a story that she took into herself. Now that story has emotions associated with it as well. So what are emotions? They're the physiological counterpart of this story. When something happens that's tragic, we feel something in our gut. We feel some sensations in our body. That's emotion. And that has emotional energy associated with that. And if we don't allow that energy to be fully experienced, to go through our heart, it gets locked in the tissues of our body. In the East, they call it a samskara. And it takes tremendous energy to keep those samskaras, those buried emotions, down. So, Eckhart Tolle labeled that image that we create, that has become how we relate to who we are in the world, that lens of perception through which we see the world. And he called it the mind-made me. And he said, we are the only species on this planet that has a mind-made me. And he gives a story of the ducks with the human mind. He said, if you watch ducks, if they come in and they fight, they turn, they wag their tails, and they're done. But now think of these ducks if they had a human mind. They'd come, they'd fight, they'd wag their tails, and they'd each be going off, I can't believe he came into my space. Boy, next time I'm really going to let him have it. It's the stories that we create. We are the only species on the planet that does that. So, Mary O'Malley has labeled that self-image, that lens, the storyteller. And the way that she relates to it is all of these stories and all of this frozen energy keeps us from seeing the meadow. It's like clouds over the meadow, and we can't see through the clouds to the meadow beneath. So, what do we do? This self-image, this storyteller, this mind-made me, has opinion after opinion after opinion. It has judgment of almost everything it sees. It's impatient. It never can have enough. There can be a momentary, oh, good, I made that achievement. But then that fades and it wants more. There isn't abundance. There isn't enough. Not only does it judge others, but we judge ourselves, usually unmercifully. It's caught in time. There's never enough time. You're always rushing. There's always the next thing that needs to be done. And in doing that, it is a narrator that is talking about everything that's going on and telling you what to do, what you should do, what you shouldn't do, what you should feel, what you shouldn't feel. And those are all part of the energy that's buried in our body, keeping us from feeling life flowing. So how do we get back to the meadow? How do we get back to the kingdom of heaven? How do we get back to the now? Well, first off, let me say you never left there. But the storyteller has created the illusion that you have. You are always in the now. There is no other place you could possibly be. You are always in the moment. There is no other moment you could possibly be living, because everything else is just a memory of or a projection of what's coming. Mary O'Malley gives a couple different practices to help us come into that moment, to help release that frozen energy, because that's the energy that prevents us from opening our heart and experiencing life directly. One is, she said, pay attention to your thoughts. Recognize that you are not your thoughts. It's just the storyteller. It's just the narrator. You don't have to listen to. I call mine the noisy roommate in the head. For a moment, Let's do a practice. I want to step back for a moment. And the practice is done a little bit easier if you're standing. If standing is unavailable to you, then please stay seated. But it's a demonstration of the mind made me versus the now. Now, in Qigong, there are many different movements. And one of the movements is called locomotive. Now, who remembers the Good and Plenty commercials? I'm really dating my... Okay, we've got a few here where they go, good and plenty, good and plenty, good. And it's like a locomotive. Well, this is the same thing, only, and don't start yet, I'll tell you when to start. We take the hands and we just move them like a locomotive. Okay, are you ready? All right, let's begin. And you can stop. How many people counted? Anybody counted? I'm a counter. I don't understand. The first service, there weren't no counters either. How many people wondered, what are we doing? Anybody? Okay. How many people thought, this is kind of silly? Was there anybody that just felt the experience of the movement of the hands and the energy that may have been moving between the hands? Because those of you that did were in the moment. Those of you that did were not thinking about what you were doing or what's this guy doing up there? Why do I have to do this? So Mary O'Malley says, you can sit down. Pay attention to that narrator. Recognize that it is not who you are. Jill Bolte Taylor, in one of her TED Talks, says, that storyteller is the size of a peanut in your brain. That takes some of the power away from that storyteller. She also has a meditative practice where she brings you into the breath, and she has you follow the cycle of the breath and let it take you inside. Let it slow things down. Let it just bring you into a stillness. And be curious. See if something comes up, some emotion, some story, some feeling, some thought. And hold that with compassionate attention. Maybe it's a story for that little girl when her mom yelled at her. And as an adult, she could hold that story and that frozen energy in compassionate attention in her heart. And by doing that, she may begin to feel that energy dissipating, releasing. Mary O'Malley says it's something like, it's kind of like champagne bubbles. Same sort of thing happens with transcendental meditation. When the mind is, you have your mind on the mantra, and the mantra takes you in gently, quietly, and then thoughts come up. They say, you're releasing stress. Same thing. They're releasing that energy that prevents you from being in the moment, being in life. Now, in Glenda Green's book, Love Never Ends, Jesus tells Glenda 3 practices to help her understand that the mind is not who she is, that her essence is her heart. The first 2, he said, daily gratitude. Strengthen those positive emotions through daily gratitude and admiration. Disempower negative emotions by practicing forgiveness. But the one that's most germane to what we're talking about is called innocent perception. And he told her, look out the window and then tell me, All right, what is it that you saw? She said, well, I saw 2 birds, 5 branches, bird droppings on the windowsill. And he said, exactly. You perceive that directly before your thoughts engaged, because the thoughts want to control everything, and they're going to embellish the story. Oh, I saw 12 branches, and I saw 5 birds. Practice that innocent perception where you get in the habit of having the experience before you start thinking about it. And the final one is radical acceptance. A willingness to hold yourself in a space where you allow yourself to experience that which is easy, that which is difficult, that which is sorrowful, that which is joyful, in the same way, without expectation, without trying to change it, just experiencing it, allowing that energy to go through you. Michael Singer's book, Untethered Soul, is all about keeping the heart open so that you can allow that energy to go through you. Krishnamurti was giving a lecture, and he wasn't known for giving his personal perspective. So when he said to everyone, do you want to know my secret? Everybody got very quiet. And you could see everybody leaning forward in their seat. And with a whisper, he said, I don't mind what happens. I'd like to finish with a poem from Rumi. It is a perfect example of radical acceptance. And it is called The Guest House. This being human is a guest house. Every morning, a new arrival, a joy, a depression, a meanness, some momentary awareness comes as an unexpected visitor. Welcome and entertain them all. Even if they are a crowd of sorrows who violently sweep your house empty of its furniture, still treat each guest honorably. He may be clearing you out for some new delight. The dark thought, the shame, the malice, meet them at the door laughing and invite them in. Be grateful for whatever comes, because each has been sent as a guide from beyond. Now, each of you may notice that there in the insert to your bulletin is a copy of The Guest House. If it isn't, there's also extra copies there. And I would encourage you for this week's practice to put it on your bedside table. And when you wake, read it and just be with it for a moment. And be grateful for whatever comes. Thank you.